My name is Tom Glozier, landowner on Houston Road.
Hi, Susan Fisher. I'm a supervisor over the Findett team with EPA.
Jessica Evans with EPA. I do community involvement.
Madeline Castle with Senator Josh Hawley's office.
Ray Bestie.
Kristen Heidemann, I'm one of the co-chairs, city resident.
Kara Elm, City of St. Charles Clean Water Advocates.
Tom Besselman, another co-chair and property owner on Houston Road.
Resident.
My name is Dale Ketter. I have a hat.
I'm Sophie Delzell. I'm a project manager with Skio Solutions. We're a contractor for EPA.
Brian Youngkin, also with Skio Solutions, providing technical assistance for the community.
Great. Let's do one more. Okay, so I want to say a word or two about the agenda, and then we'll get rolling. I think when you have this thing in your hand, you think it's going to be a microphone and will amplify you. It doesn't do that. So, okay, about tonight's agenda. The real purpose of tonight's meeting, although there are some other preliminary things here and there, is really to give you the opportunity to ask questions about the conceptual site model and to give you a pretty thorough presentation of it. And so with the permission of the co-chairs who reviewed the agenda and others who saw it, I want to ask you to take kind of a different approach than meetings like this typically go. So they typically go like this. These two nice people will stand up and talk at you, and you will become passive and reserved and lean back in your chair. And we want to break that pattern in a couple of ways. So first, we have on the agenda before they start talking, an opportunity for you to ask specific kinds of questions so that they can, on the fly, tailor what they're going to say to the things that interest you most. So hopefully that maintains your interest and keeps them on their toes and makes them responsive to the things you want to know. So if you want to know about some of the scientific stuff, the chemistry, the contaminants and what they are and all of that, then this can be about that kind of science. If you want to know about hydrology and locations and what flows where and when and how, and you want to talk about the way things move in the earth, that's a subject they can spend more time on. If you want to know about the end of the conceptual site model report, which is what do you do about such things, you know, like not building buildings in which vapors can gather and stay contained, because that's not a good idea, which is in there, or any of those other kinds of what do you do about it sorts of ideas, and you want to spend more time there, then raise those questions, and then we will ask them to spend more of their time there. So you should be driving this bus. So that's sort of the first way we want to do this a little differently. The other way is I'd ask them to sit down. So this should be not someone lording over you some pronouncement about the world and the way it's supposed to work. This is supposed to be a conversation with you and them. So if there's something you don't understand, jump in. If there's something that you need more of, ask for more of it. This should be much more conversational than these things often are. So with that, there are some preliminary things. Updates from EPA is earlier on the agenda, and then your questions, then they're answering both of your questions and also going through the materials they have prepared. And then some to-dos and some things that we will get to at the end of the agenda before you leave today, like when do you meet next and some of those kinds of more logistical things related to the CAG. So questions about the agenda, questions about that approach to the meeting? Anything before we dive in? Okay, good. So any updates from EPA before we get to these questions?
No, just that there are some new faces in here. I know I haven't introduced myself and I've been somewhat absent. I apologize for it's a disaster right now. So that is why I've asked Mike to kind of step in and help where I can't support some things at the moment. I'm hoping it will get better and improve. We've got some new hires and an actual team now, so we're getting there. But I apologize for that, and that's why I've kind of brought him in to kind of help where I can't support at the moment. So thanks for being patient. It will get better.
Okay, I will make my way back around to my chair. But yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Madeline, for coming and representing Senator Hawley's office. And thank you to Sophie, Brian, and Mike for traveling in from your homes. I know you guys are kind of spread out between the three of you across the country, so thank you for traveling in. I just have a few site updates. These are what has been sent out on the weekly CAG update, so nothing surprising. And I will be sending out an update tomorrow. And just to preface the presentation, there also is a project summary that has been drafted that's 9 pages, and it goes through a lot of the same content that Brian is going to speak about this evening. And so that will be coming out within the next week. I'll send it out to the CAG. It'll be posted on the site profile page. So if you guys have any questions, about the presentation, there'll be a project summary. I'm available, Mike's available, Brian's available to reach out to with any questions, with anything. So for just general site updates, for OUs 1 through 3, the 5-year review is still on schedule for the July 20th deadline. The contingency plan action report fieldwork has been conducted over the past couple of months. And the purpose of that is to evaluate the site conditions for possible source treatment, to optimize the OU3 remedy, and to accelerate the projected remedial timeframe. So that has been ongoing the last couple months. The groundwater extraction treatment system was turned off back in February, and that will remain off for about 6 to 12 months. But there will be additional sampling that's required. And they already did 1 round of sampling recently. I think it was in April. I know I sent it out in the weekly email. So they did do 1 round of sampling to monitor any migration of contaminants. So that's being kind of overseen by EPA, that whole process. And those will be conducted every 2 months on the same monitoring wells. If you're interested to see which monitoring wells those are going to be conducted on or have been conducted on, I can resend that map out. I sent a map out a couple weeks ago of those, so I can resend that out tomorrow. And then for OU4, we've just been chugging along on getting the focus feasibility study. The CSM has been completed. The groundwater flow modeling report has been completed. The ammonia memo has been completed. I know Tanya just sent comments back on the performance monitoring plan recently, and those comments are in the process of being uploaded to the site profile page. So once those are available, I'll send those out to the CAG. The draft submittal is still on the FFS, is still estimated around July 11th. So that's still kind of on track. And the supplemental remedial investigation report was also submitted to EPA in April. So a lot of document review going on, a lot of comments going back. So that's where we are with the FFS. Brian's here tonight to talk about the conceptual site model. That is a really big piece of the FFS. I looked through it. I am personally not a scientist. It's very technical in nature. So Brian, I appreciate you coming out tonight to present that information. You'll help me learn a thing or two, I'm sure. But that's all I have for big picture site updates. I know we haven't had a meeting in I think 7 months almost at this point. So again, this is all content that has been shared in the weekly updates. Does anyone have questions on anything?
Not directly related to that, but I read the latest St. Charles magazine. The mayor mentioned apparently the charcoal towers he had installed were working, and apparently the lawsuit with Ameren is continuing on September 2026. I didn't see any mention of this meeting mentioned in the magazine, or maybe I just missed it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they send anything out about these meetings on their end.
We've asked about that, and they want to keep it separate because of the lawsuit. So we have asked multiple times that it would be a great source of outreach. They don't want to put it in their magazines because it'll look like they're specifically supporting the CAG.
Remember, you all went through this some
We did.
7 months ago.
We did,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm trying to get this.
We
in.
went to bat with them to try to get them to understand, and they would not. So,
And that answers my question, so that didn't happen.
Well, to add to that though, too, the city, I contacted directly on my own too, and they wouldn't even fund it, even a portion of it, so.
we even asked them if they, even if it didn't come from us, if they would write something up themselves and just, put it in the magazine. And so it will be, we have a meeting, the task force has a meeting June 3rd. So it will be brought to their attention that the CAG has specifically asked why it is not in the St. Charles map. So.
Anything else site update wise before we get to CSM? Okay, so this is an opportunity for you to say, I really want you to spend time on page 5 because I didn't understand it, or I really want you to spend time at the end about, what remedies we're pointing toward because that's what matters most to me. So whatever they might be, whatever your questions are, this is the time for you to give them some insights into what you're thinking most about and what you most would wish to know tonight. So do you have, I'm wondering about?
I have one.
Chris.
Yep. Thanks. So there's gonna be, I know you're gonna present a lot of data tonight with 1 million different chemicals. If you can you stress, I guess, as far as drinking water is concerned or the community is concerned, which ones are the carcinogens or the ones that we're worried about? So like your vinyl chlorides, your TCEs, your benzenes, the one, because they're gonna see, tables with a whole list of chemicals, and not all of them are ones that we're necessarily focused on, or at least the primary ones, right?
Yes, the chemicals, compounds of concern, I think we've got a list on there, so
Okay.
we'll narrow it down.
Okay.
Big list to a small list.
All right, thanks.
Other things that you particularly want them to drill into?
The report goes over the interim response actions quite a bit, and it said that the GITS influenced the way that the water flows as well as the drinking water wells.
The drinking water wells, certainly, if different ones turn on, it sort of moves the flow paths around a little bit, so.
I might have missed this because I have not read all 450 pages, but I just was wondering if anything was mentioned about the GITS and the flow of the water and how it affects that, since could be a potential remedy. And then,
So I want to make sure that you all aren't supposed to answer these yet.
Yep, no,
These are tee it up kinds of things.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
And then also it mentioned injections into the ground, and that acetone was a component that was created, and then there were high levels of acetone within the ground. So just how that response action could affect different things. And then I thought the groundwater exposure pathway analysis was interesting. And basically just with the different well pumping situations, how the contamination kind of moves within the well field. And then Ameren's reliance on I know the abbreviation.
Natural attenuation.
Yes, I know the abbreviation better than I know what it's called. It seems like they're heavily relying on that. They're saying, well, if the response actions that we're doing don't work, then we're just going to do M&A. So kind of discuss that. It hasn't worked previously around the site, so why isn't it work this time? And then different well pumping, there were percentages given in this report saying that it would work this time and that time. And I don't know if you guys have done any research outside of this report, but it seems
Focused on this report here, and then, the full CSM has, 580 pages? So there's a lot of supplemental reports buried in the appendices and things like that. So we can look into that a little bit, talk a little bit about that, but yeah, some of the pumping the modeling that was done for the different pumping, different places and different rates and things like that, we can discuss a little bit.
It just seems, the report seems very, it might be factually true, but then Ameren kind of biases it towards themselves. They leave out certain things to make themselves sound better, so just an observation.
Other questions you want to hear most about?
Yes, mostly regarding, oh, I apologize.
You gotta get you for posterity.
So mostly regarding current events, I heard the EPA is being reorganized. So if you get fired, does that mean these three go home and we don't do this anymore? Or is there anything in place in case you're gone? And by you, I mean either you or the EPA as an organization itself.
You want to come back to it? We talk about it at the end? Other questions you want to delve into tonight so they know a little what's on your mind?
So in terms of the reorg of the organization, we haven't heard anything about our positions being eliminated or anything like that. And we have not heard anything about, support like Sophie or Brian, going away in the future. So a lot of times we get the information when you guys do. So we will make sure to, if there's anything that comes out, in the news that could impact anything with the site, we can certainly let you guys know. But we haven't heard of anything specific to this site going away.
This site is high on the administrator's list. So it's a high priority site.
Other topics, questions, things you want them to?
This is my first meeting, so I feel a little bit of a disadvantage, and I don't want to drag the group back. But I was wondering if there's a higher picture or a bigger picture. I know we're talking about a plan. I know we've been at this for many, many years. Attenuation is or is not working. And if it doesn't work, what's plan B? And have all the other alternatives been discussed? Land application, total removal, any or all of the above.
So
if you can hit those, I mean, I don't want to drag your group back, but if.
I think that's a forward-looking thing. That's what happens kind of stuff. That's for your head.
Right, okay.
So yeah, part of this presentation will talk about like the process that we're going through and where this fits into it. So maybe that gives us the bigger picture. I don't have all your answers and all the different avenues and things like that, but maybe we'll try to put this in the bigger picture of where we've been and where we're going, please. Yep.
I do remember last session or the one before that somebody asked the same question. And the answer was, yes, that is the fastest way to do it, to just dig it all out, but it's going to be ludicrously expensive. That was, I don't know who answered that. I don't have my notebook on me, but they did answer that.
Okay. Other things to help them direct their efforts? Okay, good. All right, so now you get a sense of what's on their minds a little bit. We'll give you all the floor. Are you starting or are they starting? They're starting. Great.
Okay.
Okay.
And Mike, you said I'm not allowed to stand, right?
You're not.
Okay.
You're not prohibited from standing.
I'll
The idea
stand
was
and wave my arms around a bunch, but
was to keep you at the level of the humans.
I have to rise up then. I don't know. Yes. I'll stand here, sit here, stand here. I have a presentation. We have that printed out for most of you have that. I think that'll be available online. I guess I'll get this little black box on me, so just let me know if this is not coming through or whatever. But let's look at this presentation as just discussion points instead of me just droning on about some canned speech or something like that. Let's just talk about discussion points and go through. And I hope we can answer a lot of the questions that we just brought up and sort of follow along and sort of see what we got going on here. So question, how many people went through all 580 pages of this report? No? There we go. Jess said something about a quiz at the end of this to make sure we all had everything. It's a lot. The first 60 pages are sort of the meat of that, we'll call it the CSM, the Conceptual Site Model. Beyond that, it's a lot of supportive information, figures, data sets, things like that. So if we want to really drill into some of the details, we can get down to those other pages. But it's a big report, so we'll sort of try to make it so we can all understand it. Just to introduce ourselves again, Sophie beside me. My name is Brian. I have my name tag on now in case you forget my name. We are with Skio Solutions. We are a contractor for EPA providing a task, the technical assistance services for communities. We provide we take a look at those big reports and try to distill them down to manageable information. My background is in civil and environmental engineering. I have a PhD in water resources, civil engineering, so I'll do a lot of work with surface water, groundwater. So this site with the groundwater is very intriguing. Spent several years as a instructor, professor at a university, so I sort of have that background, so I like to do quizzes and give you guys homework. No, we're not gonna do that today. And then 12 years as in project engineer for an environmental contractor. So I actually installed horizontal wells for remediation sites. Haven't installed any wells on this site, but I was across the river at Wood River, Illinois. I installed some wells over there. So familiar somewhat with the geology and the hydrogeology of the area, but that's my background. Sophie supports, and we collaborate on these reports. So we both look at these and we put together the information and we bounce ideas off each other so that it's really our group, Skio Solutions, providing this information and helping that out. So we talked about task. What is task? If you guys aren't familiar with task, it's just sort of a technical assistance for the communities. Task provides scientists, engineers like myself to go through those, review that information, those more detailed reports, and then we can develop lots of information, whether it's sitting here with you guys and with the meeting or providing some information packets. The summary will also be out here in a couple days. If there's any flyers to get out to the broader community, we can help with that too. So just sort of get the information out there. We are a contractor to EPA. Now we do provide independent look at this, and we're not advocating on your behalf, but we do provide the information. I will say that we do provide presentations like this to EPA for just a fact check, just to make sure that we're not saying anything that's incorrect. Like Jess was very helpful in sort of understanding, from my point of view, what a national priorities list caliber type site we have here versus a true Superfund site. So if you're not familiar with that, we'll get that in a minute here, but just fact checking. But other than that, we are an independent organization giving you sort of a real look at this. This evening's agenda, we'll go through some of the background of the site, the Superfund process. So we had a question earlier about sort of where we fit in the whole process from, let's say, the discovery of a chemical of concern, environmental issue, to investigations, to the cleanup process, and sort of see where we fit and where we are in that process right now. And then the conceptual site model, look at the pieces of that, from the hydrogeologic framework, the source zones and groundwater conditions, the exposure assessment, and then some of those remedial objectives. This report does not give the final remediation solution to the issue, but it talks about what has been done so far at the site. We talked about groundwater extraction wells, injections. I think I heard some people talk about, like, how does this all fit into what's been done and where are we going? So technical background. You're probably more familiar with this and have seen this more than I have over the number of years, but June 2010, There were some chemicals concerned that was found in the St. Charles public water supply. I think specifically the well number 5, which is just north of the substation location. So 2011 through 2015, there are some additional investigations performed around the area trying to figure out where that contamination is. And what we're talking about is contaminated groundwater primarily, right? So it's moving around underground, groundwater's flowing. Where is it flowing to? What are the concentrations of that groundwater contamination? So in 2012, EPA identified the Ameren, Missouri Hooster Road. Is that correct how I say that? So substation as a separate and distinct operable unit 4 in the overall Findett Corporation Superfund site. Are we familiar with the Findett sites and the other? Are those other operable units, we think OU, OU1, OU2, OU3, are they connected to OU4? They're not, are they? It's kind of like a separate sort of satellite thing out here. So keep in mind, we're going to keep it all underneath the one project umbrella of the Findett site, but this OU4 is kind of unique. It's sort of separate from the rest of that Findett location. So still underneath the umbrella, but we're going to treat this CSM and some of the reports that are going to come out after this focus on OU4. 2018 through 2020, part of the cleanup process includes remedial investigations and feasibility studies to understand that groundwater contamination. Those were completed during that time. There was and I'll get to it on the next slide here, there was a record of decision released, but then in December of 2021, there was contaminated groundwater discovered beyond what was thought the extent of the groundwater contamination. So got all this information, record of decision, I'm figuring out how it's going to be cleaned up, and we've got some more contamination outside of that area that we were focused on before. So now it's sort of going around again, and this is where you stand now, where we need to do more sampling to figure out the true extents, and it is moving, right? It's groundwater, so it can move around. So sort of figure out where it is, possibly where it could be moving to, and that's where we are now. And as part of the process, Ameren, Missouri needs to find the extent of that contamination and complete a focused feasibility study. So right now, that record of decision for the Findett and OU4 that has been released previously is going to now have a supplemental remedial investigation, understanding the extent of the contamination, and then a focused feasibility study looking at how the OU4 area and the contaminated groundwater, how that's impacting humans and the environment, and start to present some ideas to remediate, clean up, address that contamination concern. So we're sort of going back into this to look at reevaluating this OU4 area. And part of that reevaluation is this conceptual site model. Sort of putting together what we know about the site to date and giving us some building blocks to work on for the rest of the reports. Sure, yep.
Is it determined in December 21 which direction the newfound contaminant was? Northeast, northwest, towards the highway, under you, or and number 2, was it directly attributable to Ameren or other?
First question is, I don't know exactly where it was found outside. I know that the general direction of the groundwater contamination is going northward. I'm sorry if I forget the name of that road that sort of goes east, that goes east-west, and we got the public water supply well number 9 just north of that road. Is that 370? Yep. So it's going that direction. So I would think that probably seeing more contamination going that direction is my guess. And the second part of your question is that the contaminants of concern that we're tracking are related to solvents that were released, spilled at the substation site. And then as that solvent sort of breaks down, the daughter products, the sort of the related products. So all indications are that the source was that substation, and the groundwater contamination we're looking at is from that substation migrating out from that. Does that answer your two questions? We'll talk about that. It's still hazardous. It's going natural attenuation. It's sort of going towards non-harmful. But right now, there are still aspects of it that are cancer causing or hazardous to humans. Yes.
I have a question. In layman's terms, natural attenuation is basically just waiting it out, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. It's waiting it out, but the chemical is changing its makeup through time. And what's happening is this little part of that molecule is being broken down, just sort of being biologically or chemically breaking down to different compounds. So it does take time, yes. Waiting it out and letting nature take its course on break.
So that's basically like the two extremes: natural attenuation to wait it out versus literally dig the entire site and
yes,
someone, which is like $1 bajillion to do.
Yes, complete removal is one option there. Just sitting back and taking no action, letting natural attenuation. So, yep, you can see the ends of the spectrum, and there's different options in between there to sort of modify that timeline.
I just want to promise this is your first time hearing someone in a previous session asked, it wasn't me, hypothetically, if you have unlimited funds, what would be the fastest way to do it? It's literally dig it out. But again, we don't have unlimited funds.
Yes, and that would be, engineering-wise, it's a tall task to dig it all out and just literally physically remove it. We've got there are some cleanup things that are going on at the site to sort of speed up the process of reducing the hazard of the chemicals in the grounds.
So if there's new contaminant, was it found 40 feet down in the plume, or is it shallower where it affects the city's lakes and possibly damaging people catching fish out of it? And then if that's the case, why wouldn't the city close those lakes?
So what the data that the CSM is providing is that the source is at the substation. So it was solvent that was released onto the surface at the substation. The substation is surrounded by levees, so it's not like that soil is going to wash or blow out so much out of that area and move that contamination through the soils. But the soils right in the substation are considered contaminated. And then some of that solvent also then went down into the ground, percolated down to the ground and into the groundwater. I think there are some figures, I don't know if I have it in my report, but most of the contamination goes down to about 30, 40 feet below ground surface to the groundwater there. And then it sort of moves very laterally. It doesn't continue to descend. It sort of stays at that one level and goes horizontal. Ecological studies have indicated that these contaminants are not getting into the lakes and impacting or have any type of pathway or ability for the ecosystem, your fish, your birds, animals, to interact with that contamination. They're not going getting the soils in the substation, and the groundwater is deep enough it's not going into the lakes. That's what the CSM is reporting right now as something that the community should certainly stay aware of and make sure that if they need to do some surface water, the lakes, some surface water sampling to make sure that those chemicals are not going into the lake. But the hydrogeology indicates that it's sort of going below that.
And the report did address the lake quite a bit, and that there's levels there, but they can't test under there to see what the levels are under the lake.
We can't get underneath the lake because we don't want to punch a hole.
Is there a
in the
line?
barrier. from the lake to the groundwater, because that would cause, commingling of the contamination. But we did a risk assessment, risk analysis of the lake, an eco risk analysis, and we tested the fish and things. And we can do that again, I mean, whatever, but we haven't found any issues.
Well, I'm more concerned, because I know that you guys did that initially. I'm more concerned is how much contamination is in the lake, and then there's different under the lake, and then there's the well pumping, and then it says, oh, it's supposed to go through through barriers, but then if it's being pulled in the opposite direction, it's not going through.
Right, so the last sampling event we did out there, I was out there, and so we made sure to sample, because I'm with you, I'm like, how much is underneath the lake, so we just have a sample on this side of the lake. I can't remember which city well it was by, but we sampled over here on this is the lake, and we sampled over here. We sampled on all sides of the lake to try to determine actually how much is underneath there. And, it's like, we can guess and calculate,
Yeah. So just continuing on, knowing sort of ecologically, pathways are not, we don't see pathways that are connecting the contamination to some of the ecological receptors, the animals, plants, things like that. But there is concern about the groundwater reaching some of the public water supply wells in the area for St. Charles. So there are, I believe, 7 water supply wells around the area, mostly really to the north, east, and right around the area of concern there. And that provides 3.5 million gallons of water per day, about 28% of the water needs for the area. And it's sort of, I'm not sure what the current pumping sequence is, what pumps are active at any given time, but that's sort of where the pumps are coming from, or the water's coming from. And then some of the remaining water demand is coming from the city of St. Louis. Now, projecting ahead, there's indications that you need more water in the future. Where's that water going to come from? More wells, pumping more wells. So start to think about what we know now about the site and how that site may change in the future is a concern, right? Understanding where we're going to be pulling water from, how that could move that groundwater around. So I saw one study in the CSM report there saying that maybe up to 6 new wells may be needed for the future water demands up through to 2040 or something like that. So a dynamic situation with probably more wells in the future.
And then
Yep.
that was just based on the information
In the CSM.
It doesn't reflect current or future usage or production.
Yep.
I did have a question. Last time it was brought up, wasn't it half of the water in St. Charles City comes from St. Louis?
I think it was even more than half is what the CSM, what I'm seeing from the CSM, I didn't look at the actual public waterworks or anything like that to see what the breakdown was, but yes.
That's been since even before the current mayor was mayor, so.
Okay.
Where do I find that information, by the way?
The city's public waterworks department should have a website with that information on it. So I did not look at that for this presentation, but I can look at that next time. I know I've seen that information for other communities too. The CSM then is sort of looking, we're going to have to take a time slice here. We can't, so the CSM is going to have look at data from 2012 when that sort of we're first aware of some of that contamination around the substation, and it ends for the purpose of this report, July 2024. I think, Jess, you were just talking about there's still ongoing sampling, ongoing data collected. So this is not saying that it stops with the completion of the CSM. It's just at some point you have to stop getting the new data so you can write the report. So that's what we're sort of the snapshot we're looking at. And sampling to date included in the CSM are nearly 400 soil samples from 87 borings.
That's trying to determine where that contaminated soil is. Nearly 2,600 groundwater samples from 113 groundwater monitoring wells around the area. 256 water samples from the city's wells. So that's good information to sort of see what's actually going into the drinking water supply. And then multiple slug tests and aquifer pump tests. These are kind of neat from my perspective as an engineer. Basically looking at pumping those wells or injecting volumes into those wells with the purpose of understanding how groundwater flows through the soils. It really gives a great understanding of how fast or how slow and how much time it may take for, if we find contamination over here, to reach a well across 370 or some other location. Those are some really interesting tests to sort of understand the hydrogeology of the site, to have those tests. There's a figure there. I'm sure I took it right from the CSM, just putting dots on a map on where those sample locations were. A lot of the soil sampling is within the confines of the substation, and then more of the groundwater sampling was tracking towards the north. Generally, the natural groundwater flow is towards the north, due north. So that's why we see most of that going up. And as we heard, where you can get some groundwater, drill some borings around those lakes without punching through the liner, get some additional data there.
There's a barrier, there's a file barrier on those? Well, yeah, that separates it from the groundwater.
What type of barrier?
Are they perched above the groundwater table?
I believe so, but
Yeah.
Probably clay, something in that nature.
Could be clay.
Kind of some sort of clay barrier. I think I'm not really sure what kind of barrier there is.
Are you talking about the type of material?
Well, what's the barrier that's keeping the lake separated from the groundwater?
I spent a ton of money on a bunch of drillings on my property.
Okay.
For geotechnical reasons and environmental, but geotechnical. It's a cohesive, around here we call it black gumbo, but it's considered, I want to say, impenetrable.
Okay.
We've studied the vapor intrusions, we've studied all of that, what can come up. I'm no scientist, but it appears the 40-foot flume down there is staying there and not working its way up. That's why I asked about the lakes. If the lakes are 10 feet deep and the plume is 40 feet, you might have a 30-foot cushion.
Yeah.
If we're talking about the same thing.
Okay.
But it's a cohesive soil.
Okay.
There's a sand layer at about 20-something feet. That's not cohesive.
So it sounds like it's clays, maybe some fine silt sort of packed in there pretty tight, with the idea that it limits the.
And the city's wellhead, I don't want to dominate here, but the city's wellhead district clearly calls out that if anybody excavates in the wellhead district, they have to have a minimum of a 5-foot proven cohesive layer.
Okay.
So that they don't penetrate down into the well system. And the wellhead district is to protect drinking water before we would start talking about all this.
Yep. I think I mentioned it here. Not here in the next slide or two about that, and then we'll talk about the geology and some of those. Yep.
I mean, I can show you the reports. You'll understand what it means. I just didn't pay for the reports.
Yep. But in layman's terms, we're looking at a fine material, impenetrable, basically water, very hard for water to move through it. Packed clay, things like that. So if that was for separating the lakes or anything that any excavation you do in the area, separate surface activities from the aquifer.
I think it's a man-made lake. Those are man-made lakes.
Well, our man-made lake, but that's why we're saying barrier. I wanted to make sure, is it a man-made barrier or was it a natural occurring layer that we're talking about underneath?
Those lakes were excavated as a borrow pit for the development around there, the highway and the industrial park. They were dug down to create the lake, right, Tom?
Yes, and the report I got from the construction company because I'm on the road all the time and make friends in the wave and high homes and that. The guy, the laborer told me that they dug into the sand. And at that time, 01, 2, and 3, were going to different meetings and all that. I was under the assumption that the chemicals, whatever they had in the 55-gallon drums buried or whatever, was left on the property, and the sand was going to clean it up, and we'd see over years of if that worked or not. And Tom here tonight said the black gumbo is 40 feet down.
Not the whole 40 feet.
Yeah.
Because when you dig down and you hit about 25, you start getting sand and water coming in sideways, depending on the level of the river.
And then underneath that is another barrier of
More cohesive.
more cohesive.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so I've always asked and said in meetings, no matter if it's this one or city or anything like that, have you tested the fish in the lake? And tonight I got an answer. Yeah. So it's
Just a quick, okay, I want to move back to the presentation. We got an hour left.
Yeah.
So, just a quick question. When was the pit dug? Like, what time scale is this? Like 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s?
What?
I mean, the two city lakes,
Yeah.
when Newtown was developed,
When Fountain Lakes was developed?
Fountain Lakes, yeah.
2000, yeah, 2003.
So I'm going to move you back onto Ameren and the NOU.
Yep.
Sorry.
Good information, though. You guys have a wealth of
didn't want you to
information on the
spend more
site,
time.
on the area, so. Getting to your question about the Superfund process, or this is a national priorities list caliber site in that it follows the Superfund process. It is not on the national priorities list, but it follows the Superfund process. And part of that is that there's a responsible party that is taking, at least cooperating and putting together and following the reports or following the process. And it's also it's funded through that responsible party. So it's not sort of subject to that federal Superfund allotment there. So that's sort of where we are. And I will refer to this as sort of a Superfund type site, Superfund process. It's going to follow the same process. And I like to show this. It's linear generally in nature, right? Go from discovery, investigation, figure out your plan, do your plan, evaluate your plan at the end. But what makes this always a little bit different is that there was a record of decision released in 2021 for OU4. And that was, this is how it's going to be cleaned up. That's the decision document there. However, there is new contamination discovered beyond or outside of that sort of OU4 record of decision there. So we're actually going to go circle back around and do some reinvestigation to understand where we are in the process. So when we look at what are we doing here today and how does this fit into the whole thing, think of OU4 as sort of its own area for the purpose of cleanup. There was a record of decision released, and now there's some new information available. It's going to go back and do some more investigations and possibly amend or modify that record of decision. So that's what where we are here. Yep.
That new cleanup is that the new area that was found that's like down by 370
I didn't see.
north of Ameren Station.
That seems to be where the focus of the attention is now, but I didn't see where it was before 2021 versus after 2021. So
I think 21 was in the substation.
in the substation, just within that.
I would think.
Okay.
So if it's beyond 370, the new study, shows that we have contamination down there. Is that the same contamination that's inside the substation, or is that a sister of what we have because it's traveling through water and deleting itself, or something other?
You're stealing my thunder for later slides, but
Okay.
it's the same, it's likely the same source from the substation, and it's moving, it's going to show up as a different compound when we sample downstream after it travels 1,000 feet or whatever, but it is, all indications are that it's from the same source of the substation. Remedial investigation. Here we're basically characterizing the existing conditions and developing the site, conceptual site model. So this is what I keep talking about. This is a sort of a building block of that remedial investigation. In this case, a supplemental remedial investigation. Going back and looking at it further. And then also evaluating risk to the human health and the environment. Those are the objectives of an RI report, which I think is being drafted right now in the draft review process for a remedial investigation report that should be coming out here soon on this OU4 area.
Is the CSM part of the 3D model that
Yes. Yep. This is, I've seen some conceptual site models that are nice, like three-dimensional schematic, very easy to visually sort of comprehend. This is the same thing in a 60-page document in words. Let's keep moving along here. The CSM really provides information on the potential sources, contaminants of concern. So I know those are some questions that we have about the source contamination concern. Where is the contaminant located? Contaminant migration. Where is it moving to? What's it moving in? We talk about media, groundwater, surface water, soils, air. Here we're talking about primarily groundwater. Exposure potential. So what things can touch, drink, breathe the contamination that we're concerned about. And then some cleanup options to reduce that risk. This is not providing a comprehensive cleanup options available, but this is just sort of CSM is providing what's been sort of done to date. So 4 parts of a CSM, looking at the site geology, groundwater hydrology, the source of contamination, how it moves, potential exposure pathways, and like I said, cleanup actions to address that contamination. I'm just going through real quick. That's just sort of an overview. Now, let's take that slice. You had a bunch of drillings on properties, your properties or properties around there. We take those drillings and we basically get a cake slice of what the ground looks like if we were to sort of cut down into it. That's what we get with those soil borings. This is what we're looking at. You have the top layer down to about 30, 35 feet maybe of pretty fine material. Those are from more recent, I think someone said that we're in a floodplain here, right? So those are some of those fine sediments that are coming in periodically and laying down. So once those floodwaters recede, what's left behind? That really fine silts and clays that were spent in the water sit there. That's what those top 30 feet or so of material is. Clays and silts. I say low hydraulic conductivity. That just means it is difficult for water to move through that stuff. It's really fine. It's packed together. Whether it's underneath, like the lake, is for reasons of preventing infiltration, but it's really a fine material that impedes water moving through. So think of sort of like a roof on our aquifer here. And then between 35 to 100 feet are sands, gravels, larger material. So think about water moving through sand. It moves through sand easier than it does through the clays. That was probably deposited through more historic events with probably still river deposits of sand and gravels, but it's a lot more voids, open spaces in between each one of those particles. Water moves much easier through there. That's where we're going to put our water wells. That's where, if I've got groundwater moving, that's where it's going to be, in that 35 to 100 feet below ground surface. Deeper in that, we get into limestone. Think of that as effectively the floor of our aquifer here. So that's sort of looking at the slice here. That's what we have. Hydraulic conductivity is a big player here. That's what The higher the hydraulic conductivity, the more readily it flows through. The lower the hydraulic conductivity, the more the soils impede, slow down that water moving through.
Is it fair to say that that's why this is taking 30 years? If this was Wisconsin where it's all sand, it would have already flushed all the way through the system 30 years ago.
I think there's pretty good flow once it gets down through. How long it took maybe to get from the surface soils of the substation down in, that may have been a little bit slower in the process there. But also I'm seeing that at the substation, that the groundwater, it seems like it's just going straight down for a ways. So it's not moving off the substation site. It's not getting any closer to the wells, but then boom, once it gets down to like that 35, 45-foot layer, then it's going horizontal. So like you're seeing your test pits, you get a sand seam or something like that, it's going to move horizontal much faster then. So maybe slow getting down to depth, but then fast going across. Part of the CSM is introducing a groundwater model. My research in college was a lot of modeling. I did a lot with the surface water model paired with this groundwater model. I'd love to talk to you all day about groundwater models, but I was given a dry run with Sophie earlier in the week, and she just glossed over when I started talking about that. So we can get into that more detail later, but just understand that when we're trying to think about all those 7 wells that are out there and how they're being pumped in different ways, it is hard to go out at any period of time, okay, city, pump these wells at this time, we're going to go out and monitor that for a number of days and see what we got. Let's put in a computer model. That's what they're doing here. So in a computer model, you're looking at sort of breaking it into individual cells. A lot has to do with that hydraulic conductivity. But you're also looking at, I think someone in the room mentioned that groundwater flow is dependent on the river stages, right? So we've got, I forget, is it the Mississippi River to the north and the Missouri River to the south? So as those move up and down, that can change how that groundwater is flowing there. So think of those as your boundary conditions. In modeling, they're going to set those sort of boundary conditions. Okay, rivers to the north is at this, river to the south is at these levels, and then they're going to let that model run through and figure out sort of how that groundwater is flowing. And then, okay, this little node right here, I'm going to turn that on and have water being sucked out of that location. Sort of think of that as a groundwater, as a water supply well. I'm going to suck water out of that location. What does that do to how that groundwater flows around that area? That's what this model does. So I think that sort of covers the basis there. We'll keep moving, but if anyone have any questions, I'm happy to sort of talk about modeling.
I just want to say thanks. I found the information on the water
For Public Water Works?
40% from St. Louis and 60% from St. Charles itself.
60% from St. Charles, 40% from St. Louis.
I don't know if this is like
okay.
after the wells were closed, so it might have been higher than that in St. Louis, or this was before it was closed.
That's good information, yeah.
I also found the phone numbers. I'm going to call them. Well, tomorrow.
Yep.
Have you generally, we're talking about OU4, but have you generally in the past handled OU1, OU2, and OU3, all this same process in these same subjects?
I have my studies for this group have focused on OU4. I am not too familiar with what's going on at the other OUs, so I don't have the answer to that question.
They will. But for another time.
Yeah.
For another time. No, you're good.
Tom, we have a site rate fact sheet. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So the modeling scenarios, different, put together that groundwater model, and then go in there, like I said, activate different parts of that model to act as extraction zones, pulling water out, and looking at how different wells are related. And there's different scenarios there. I will just summarize that the groundwater, the model that was created identified that I think a lot of water is pulled from well number 9, maybe north of 370. We're sort of pulling that water in that direction. But wells 10, I'm going to go back here where I had my. In that model, if well number 10 is turned on, and also even well number 8, if those are turned on, what that does is normally water flows due north, basically right up along the well line here and into the CW9 area. And there are some, we'll talk about here in a little bit, some cleanup options, some barriers there to prevent and treat that water as it's moving northward. However, the computer model noted that if CW10, CW8 were turned on along with number 9, that sort of shifts the groundwater flow. So instead of the groundwater flow, just think of it as going due north, it then sort of moves out to the east a little bit before going north. It's basically being pulled towards some of those water extraction, those water supply wells, not to confuse with the extraction wells, but pulled towards some of those water supply wells. So that was an interesting thing I found at the model, is that it is showing that different pumping scenarios is moving that groundwater around. So if we want to put something in place and not dig every last bit of dirt out of the ground, but put something in the ground to intercept that water, this model is helpful in figuring out where those need to be to intercept that water, depending on which pumps are being used.
So is the city using all of those pumps right now?
No. Nope. Everything is working. Are they all pumping at the same time? Are they sort of cycling between different pumps scenarios?
Great if the city was here.
Yeah, they don't show up. If they're not using all of them.
Yep.
I would think that your analysis could come up with a scenario to help guide where we want it to go. If it doesn't matter, if there's,
Yes.
if there's 10 of them, and if we always pump 5 and to get the quantity they want, to control which ones they are, we could theoretically pull the water or push the water where the bad stuff where you want it to be. Instead of, if they're working together, it's like, well, we feel like this one or that one, and without any plan, you could model a plan to help push the contaminants through wherever the filters are, et cetera.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Now, just to be clear, it's not my model. I'm just interpreting the model. So, yep. But that's a great idea. I mean, you also have to, the model is there. It's built now. So, and also if the river levels change, you can see how the groundwater impacts different pumping things. So it's not just a static thing. It's going to be a little dynamic. But yes, you certainly have to figure out sort of what the water demand is, and some wells may need to be rehabbed, some pumps may need to be pulled at certain times, so you have to sort of factor that all into how the whole system works. Oh, I went ahead. Contaminants of concern, compounds of concern. Water, if you go through your water quality reports for drinking water or these wells, they're going to analyze a wide number of compounds, maybe hundreds of compounds. But what was really narrowed down for this study was looking at the compounds, contaminants of concern. And that all stems from what the source is. The source being the tetrachloroethene, the PCE, that was released, dumped at the substation site. That was a solvent. I didn't see if there was a date or quantity released in the CSM. That was not clearly stated, but that was released at the substation. That then contaminates the soils and leaks into the ground. Natural attenuation, that PCE starts out looking like that with a bunch of chlorines around it. Slowly, or over some period of time, those chlorines are picked off. And that could be through a biological, there's some microorganisms that like to consume some of that stuff, or a chemical reaction that changes that molecule. And so it goes through the tetrachloroethene to the trichloroethene, and then to the dichloroethene compounds. So it's natural attenuation. So the process is it's going from PCE all the way down to ethene. So when we're looking at the water samples down gradient to the north of the substation, we may not detect, or we may not see any values for the PCE or the TCE. That was what it was originally dumped on the ground or put on the ground. But through time, that's changed to different types of compounds. And really what we're looking at now at this phase of the life of the site, a lot of the vinyl chloride and I believe the cis-1,2 dichloroethene sort of right in here along those two is where we are there. So over time, I have some graphs later in the presentation, the PCE, TCE concentrations are declining, whether it's by putting amendments in the ground, cleaning it up, or through natural attenuation, but it's moving on to other still harmful contaminants, those dichlorethenes and the vinyl chlorides, before it gets into the non-harmful end phase. So natural attenuation. It may take days, it may take years for those to break down, to move through that process. So, but that is what's going on when people are talking about natural attenuation. It wants to go naturally from here to the right there.
Question.
Yep.
I guess those near end products are rising as the attenuation goes on.
Yes.
So some levels could actually be rising, but it's still
Good observation, yes.
Yeah.
PC is declining, but the other ones may be rising because that's what it's being transferred into. So, yep. So right now, what I'm seeing as and I have this in one of my slides, is the main things we're looking at where exceedances are near exceedance or above the drinking water standards are for that cis-1,2 dichloroethene and vinyl chloride, I believe, are the ones that are really showing up downstream. And I've got some, like I said, we'll get to that in a minute here. So source zone, media, like I said, soils. Contaminated soils, really just looking at that substation, not looking at contaminated soils. It's not getting outside the levee, not outside of the fence. Groundwater, TCE, detected in groundwater directly beneath the substation at fairly low concentrations. Then we have vinyl chloride, above drinking water standards for 11 samples underneath the substation. This is still within the substation footprint, where the drinking water levels are 2 micrograms per liter, and then 1 exceedance for the cis-1,2 dichloroethene, which has MCL of that.
So of the 11 samples that were above, were there only 11 samples, or were 11 were the only ones above? Out of how many of
Those were the only ones that reported above, I believe.
And then 11 out of how many?
I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know like if that's like over a period of time, like it's the same wells hot every time, or if multiple different wells and things like that. So that would be a good question. I can look into that. What's that?
A date?
Yes, there is. I don't have it in my presentation, but we can go back and look in that and get the exact date on that. Yep. We talked about where's the highest concentrations in the groundwater. It's at 35 to 45 feet. That's where it's going down, hitting that sort of sweet spot there. And then that narrow plume of contamination, mostly the vinyl chloride, is moving to the north. That's the natural flow of the groundwater. And in general, contamination concentrations of OU4, and we have to be careful with that, and we'll talk about that, is going down. But PCE, TCE are we're sort of moving on from that, getting into the vinyl chlorides and things like that. So that's sort of room for interpretation and some different results there. But in general, overall, contamination is decreasing somewhat to what's being done at site and somewhat to the natural attenuation.
And that natural, the barrel bloom.
Yep.
What depth?
Primarily, it's at 35 to 45 feet below ground surface. And there's some neat figures I don't know if I've included, but it goes, like if a groundwater well is pumping, it's going to flow horizontal at that depth, right up to about 75 feet away from that well. And then at that point, it drops, it sort of gets sucked down deeper into where the well screen is at deeper depth. But normally it's going to just, it's trending along at that 35 to 45 foot below ground surface level.
So I had a question. What year did the original contamination take place, and when did they stop dumping the chemicals there?
Great question. I did not see that in the CSM. So part of that is when, how much, and when did it stop being a problem, right? Great questions. The CSM that I did not see the CSM answer those questions in my research of that.
As far as we know, there's no further contamination. We're just dealing with leftovers from years ago.
I believe that's correct. I would think that there's enough sampling going on now at the site that we're not coming across 55-gallon drums or leaking something or other there. So here's some of those pictures. Just sort of put some colored dots to those hot spots. Again, substation has more of the exceedances for the MCL, those drinking water standards. For vinyl chloride on the, make sure I got on the left, right is the cis 1,2-dichloroethene. And so red is exceeding. Red is obviously the worst, is bad, exceeding the level. Those red dots for vinyl chloride and for the other are both within that substation. We're not seeing it beyond the boundaries of that substation, but there are noted readings northwards as that groundwater is moving north. So that's the yellow. It's detected. It's not at that non-detection level. So there is some to the north there. So thinking about how we can touch, how we can be impacted by that contamination. Let's break it down into soils and sort of locations. So the soils, really the only place that we can touch those soils would be within that substation. And that's the workers that could be exposed in there. Groundwater in the entire area. It's been identified through some environmental study or ecological studies that it's not really the plants and animals that are going to be touching and drinking that groundwater. It's the humans that could be drinking and touching that groundwater through the water supply wells primarily. And then there's also a concern of vapor intrusion. And this is those chemicals in the ground, they volatilize, just as if like you think about spilling gasoline on the ground or whatever, that will over time evaporate and move up. From the ground to the surface, if we're sitting on top of that contamination, it volatilizes, goes into vapors and moves up. If it's out in a wide open area, not so much of a concern. It gets to the surface, wind, it just gets diluted. Ultraviolet light can sometimes break some of these compounds down, but it's not an issue if it's just on a field or in an open area. The problem is if that air, those vapors come up and get trapped in a building. So right now, where there could be vapors, there is no building. That is the substation site. However, to think about future land use, if that substation would ever change, move, or be repurposed, and they put a building on there, that we will have to keep track of if there's vapor concerns, vapor intrusion concerns. So when we talk about vapor intrusion, it's really that indoor air quality that's compromised because you don't have that exchange like you do outside. So that's where we want to keep track of that. It's not a current issue, but if any building came on site, that would be something to think about.
Part of some record, so 40 years from now, somebody tries to, everybody forgets about this. If they go to try to get that, some type of plan on that, my plan is the city's gonna know what to say, or somebody's gonna say something.
Yes, oftentimes there's like institutional controls or that record of decision would have that in the document. And being that this is a NPL caliber site, I would assume that there'd be 5-year reviews. So every 5 years, they would evaluate the site and sort of make sure that in perpetuity, I think. Yep.
That's what I meant.
Yes, that's the institutional controls. They'll put restrictions on. Yep. Good question. So record decision we talked about. So these are some of the record decision things that are in that 2021 document. Objectives being prevent exposure to contaminants above their drinking water standards in groundwater, prevent potential future risk to human receptors from inhalation of groundwater contamination via the vapor intrusion pathway. These are the goals. These are the objectives of that record of decision, of any cleanup effort. Prevent future migration of groundwater contamination off-site, and restore groundwater to beneficial use. Bring it back to drinking water standards there. And I believe the existing point of compliance, so to meet those objectives, it's being tested at the end of the water treatment system before it goes out into the water distribution system. So that's where, to make sure that it's meeting those standards, water is being sampled at that location. Are you guys aware that that some cleanup efforts have been taking place over the last 10, 15 years? Yeah. Number of different ideas, things going out there. Timeline here, look at starting in 2014, and 4 different cleanup methods have been implemented here. We'll look at all of those. Permeable reactive barriers, in situ bioaugmentation injections, in situ chemical oxidation injections, and then the groundwater extraction and treatment system. Those 4 different things have been put into place at this site. Yep.
Did somebody mandate those? Or how did they take place?
Those would have been put in before the record of decision released in 2021. So I'm not sure there's a mandate. Maybe EPA can provide more insight on that.
I think the reactive barriers were put in quickly on the PRPs. The PRP that responsible for did it without EPA input. So the first barriers were put in, I believe. And I don't know about, I think the GET system was under EPA recommendations. And,
You go back to that stand, so.
in situ bioaugmentation injections, that's part of the reactive barriers. The reactive barriers I know were put in quickly, and they were not under EPA. As the rest was probably under EPA consultation.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so starting with those early ones, I think 2014, around that time, was some of those initial permeable reactive barriers. Maybe the first wave in 2014, more recently, 2023 or so. When we think about permeable reactive barriers, I like to think of it as sort of like a picket fence you put in the ground and the water flows through it. So it's sort of a barrier, but it's not a completely impervious barrier, right? So the groundwater can flow through it, and the material you make that barrier out of can react with the contaminants in the groundwater and speed up. I don't know if I want to use the word natural attenuation, but it'll speed up the process at which that PCE is moving towards the ethene. So it's sort of moving that process along faster moving through that barrier. And
Is that chemical reaction kind of thing where you need to do that forever, or is it once it reacts, that spot is dead now, and over time that barrier becomes useless, or is it?
the purpose, well, two parts. The purpose of the barrier is to be in the pathway of the moving flow. So it's constantly sort of intercepting new material coming from the source going downstream. So that's why we see a lot of these green lines indicate those barrier locations. So it is designed to keep intercepting new groundwater. Hopefully what's downstream is cleaner.
But I guess my question is, are they as effective in 2014 or today as they were when they were put in?
I believe they were saying that the lifespan of these is 40 years. So the idea is the material you're putting in there is designed to last more than just a couple of years. That's the permeable reactive barrier. Now we talked about the other injections. Those are more like one-time boom type thing.
So they eventually wear out, looks like in about 40 years.
Permeable barriers I consider more of like a long-term option there.
Is there carbon in the barriers though? Because there was something in the report that they only last 2 to 5 years. Carbon.
I think it's more of an iron, zero valent iron, and that's sort of, you get into limits of my chemistry and how all that reacts, but I think it's more iron-based in the barriers and more carbon products in those injections. Yep. And now the CSM report also states that under some flow conditions, it's possible that the flow could be moving both north and then reverse itself, move south. If that's could be based on, again, your boundary layers, your river levels or whatever. So there is there's possible that you could have it sort of keeps going back and forth through that sort of cleaning. I'm not sure if filter is the right word because it's sort of chemically altering the compounds, but it's sort of, it's always there, it's always working. Now the problem is, you see all these barriers here, CW9 up here, CW6, they're pumping away, but then what was suspected is that if you turned on pump number 10 somewhere out here to the east, whoop, it's going to move that groundwater around. Yep, it'll go back to CW9, but it may go around those barriers. So it may go around that, what we're, yep, it could, it's those water supply wells can change the natural. So we think of the natural progression or natural flow may alter as you pump different ways. So the idea is where to put those barriers in initially, and now that model may find that sort of going around that. Yeah, yet maybe that's an option for the future, but that's sort of what the state is currently as of 2023, right? So.
When did 370 go in?
When was
Let's consult engineer.
Go back and look at Google Earth history views or something like that. So that's that picket fence barrier that we were talking about.
So it was built between
Yep.
1988 and 1996.
Okay. So all these were installed after that. Bioaugmentation injections. So I talk about those chlorinated compounds. They can break down through natural attenuation or through help from us. They can go through that process down to that ethene through various means. That sort of chemical or biological reaction where it's pulling those different chlorines off of that molecule and making it eventually to a non-hazardous substance. It's hazardous through the dichloroethanes and the vinyl chloride that we're talking about, but ultimately it will be less harmful. So I don't want to say that as it goes through the progression, it is becoming less harmful. I'm just saying that there is still harm in those compounds until we get to the end stage. So keep that in mind. We're not reducing necessarily the hazard there, but
Would that cause gases to come out of the ground? Because I know last year there was people saying that they were seeing gas coming out.
seeing, okay.
Bubbling.
So the-
Somebody had a video, she's talking about methane.
okay.
Could that be due to that, or is that due to the injections?
Chemical oxidation. That's fine.
So you have the injections, whether you're putting in, so the bioaugmentation, that's the biology. So so what you're doing is putting in a microorganism, they're naturally occurring microorganisms that like to eat that stuff, or a food source that promotes the naturally occurring microorganisms to go around and eat up that chlorinated product. Is there a byproduct of methane gas from that? I am not sure, but that could be what you're talking about. Then there's also, that's bioaugmentation. The next slide is the chemical injections, which is taking the chemical approach. That's a chemical reaction, taking that chlorine off to do the same thing. If it is bubbling to the surface and if it's methane, I think that's more biological, but that's.
We think it's both naturally occurring and because of the injections.
Okay.
Two different reasons.
And so, and it's methane. Okay, so that'd be a byproduct of that process. So from this, yep.
It would be more from the in situ chemical, not so much from the bioaugmentation. It's the one he's about to talk about.
Yep.
It'll be more from that.
So we have this figure here. The bioaugmentation, I think, was more within the substation. That's sort of orange dot, whatever that color dot is, within that area. And then we'll go right into the chemical oxidation, the blue dots around that. So since we were there, a little bit farther on outside of that substation also, but yes, so now we're injecting, the contractors are injecting chemicals into the ground to neutralize or speed up that decomposition of the PCE. Sodium permanganate was what I saw was the injection that was in the ground. Now these injections, how I'm aware, you would inject that in the ground and you have set a certain amount of volume that goes into the ground that will react with the chemicals of concern that we're trying to target. But once that material is used up, it's not like a continual permereactive barrier. I think it's sort of just a natural continual filter that lasts for long periods of time. I think this has more of a limited lifespan that maybe I hear 2 to 3 years. I'm not sure what the span is on that, but think of those as like discrete injection time periods and treating the flow, the groundwater around that. Now it will sort of dissipate, move downstream with the groundwater and move with it a little bit, but it's going to be it'll only last for a short period of time, a shorter period of time. And then the fourth cleanup option being used is the groundwater extraction. So on this figure here, we've got a couple within the substation itself. I can only imagine drilling in a substation with all that electricity around, but that's interesting. So you have to think about where and how you can drill in a pretty hazardous area there. And then of course, a couple here at the top corner here. Again, we're sort of thinking that's the natural direction groundwater is flowing. I have to look at my slide here. 5 extraction wells installed. I think 3 originally, 2 more recently. 4 are currently operational. 1 was turned off in 2017 just because it didn't show any contaminants within that water that was pulling out of the ground. I don't know, was that one that was off to the west? I'm not sure which well that is, but there was one well, it's like there's no point in sucking more water out of here because it's not pulling the contamination out of the ground. So there are 4 currently still being used. Different from those in situ, in place cleanup options is you only have it's a passive cleanup process. yes, you're putting stuff, you're injecting stuff in the ground, but then you go home at night, it's doing its thing. Groundwater extraction, it's pumping. It's pulling that water from the ground up to the surface, cleaning it, and then discharging the water under a approved permit for discharge. Is it surface water or injected back into the ground? Surface water is where that water is leaving in. So it's going through a treatment process on the surface. Don't see what the treatment system is on the surface, but it's going through a treatment on the surface, pulling water out and moving it out. So.
Kind of like the same idea as the dialysis machine.
Yeah. Air stripping, okay. So that's sort of what we're looking at there, where this figure sort of focuses on the substation. Know that there are some of these remedies, especially those reactive barriers, are beyond the substation boundaries there. Okay, so results over the last years. Now this information is provided by Ameren's environmental consultant. So I'm not the one that analyzed this data, like put together data, pulled it out of the ground, analyzed it, or put these together. So this is what the CSM is reporting. And the chemicals that we are looking at primarily are those vinyl chlorides and that dichloroethene. That's not what the source material was. That's not what was originally spilled, but that is what that original material, that original solvent has morphed into. These are what we're looking at here. Generally, we're looking at the wells we've got here. I don't know if you can see it in the printouts. I don't have reference which exact figure it was out of the, if you want to look at it in the report itself. But what we're looking at is sampling locations, basically ascending. The higher the number, generally the farther away it is from the source. One is in the substation that goes up towards 12, 11 and 12 north of the highway. Generally, according to the CSM, those values are decreasing over time. GSE? Was it GSI? GSI environmental, yep. So the raw data is in those appendices, those 500 and some pages at the end here, to look at some of that raw data. But this is putting out their presentation of this information. So we're looking at decreasing. Generally, those tables, left to right, is in chronological order, or chronologically, each one of those graphs, 2014 to 2024, older to newer. The dashed line on here is the drinking water standard. So we want to be, one of the objectives of the record of decision is to be below that drinking water standard. And we see generally they're declining through those. I mean, we certainly need to figure out why are we seeing increases right here at PZ11, right up there. So we see some increases. Now, one of the questions or comments earlier was during this decomposition of the PCE that we may see some of these daughter compounds sort of rise up as it sort of morphs into that type of compound and then goes on down through. I'm not sure if that's what we're seeing here. Some of those rises are from that sort of moving from the trichloroethylenes into the vinyl chlorides or whatever, but we are seeing some rises there. So we need to keep in mind, so that is right near the MCL at this location here. So that's considerably north of the site, and there are some water supply wells around there. So something to keep in mind, keep an eye on that.
And it's true for both chemicals at PZ11.
Yeah.
So that's that one and that one. That's the same location.
Yep.
That's kind of hard to see, I imagine.
PZ11 is one of those areas where those permeable reactive barriers were sort of in that general area, and modeling may indicate that turn pump number 10 on, some of that stuff may go around, so it may not go through all the same treatment, picket fences or injection points as if those eastern wells were on.
Has any other company made a part like these other than the one made by Ameren?
I'm not aware of any, but we can look into that. So we can look at the raw data, and I would assume that it would have to follow some type of work plan and procedures and standard practices for the raw data. So we can either look at that raw data and pull our own plots out of here if we want to. So let's sort of summarize and wrap this up as far as what the CSM provides for us. Source, media, pathways, receptors. Those are sort of the questions that the CSM is going to answer for us. The source, the CSM provides that source was a solvent that was released on the substation site. I did not see a date. I did not see a volume. I did not see an end date of when it stopped. But the information we do have is that it was a solvent released at the substation. Medias of concern. Where can we touch, breathe, drink this bad stuff? Media there is either soils on the site within the fence and the levee of the substation, or in a larger area, the contaminated groundwater that's moving around, generally flowing northwards out from underneath that substation, but those are the two media that we're looking at of concern. Pathways, how can we or animals touch this stuff? Well, we could touch the soils, we could ingest the groundwater, or we could inhale the vapors if it was trapped in a confined building space. And who could be exposed to this? The receptors. Workers on site, they're the ones that could be touching that dirt, or they could be the ones breathing those vapors in if there was a building on that site. And then the general public could be drinking that water. So those that may be consuming the groundwater are potential receptors. Ecological studies have sort of eliminated the animals, birds, plants, things like that from this equation. So that's what we're looking at right now, just the human receptors here. So let's get back to the big picture. The CSM is a building block that remedial investigation is building on. So there's a supplemental remedial investigation that's in draft right now. So let's remember, there was a record of decision released in 2021. We're going to circle back and do some more characterization because some more contamination has been found or sort of in larger areas. So we're back here, remedial investigation, and then a focused feasibility study looking at just that OU4 area. Once more information is determined, there may be proposed additional cleanup efforts or evaluation of addressing the contamination that's been found. And that would be provided in an amendment or an explanation of significant differences, an ESD added on to the existing record of decision. Record of decision is a legal document, and this would just sort of supplement that as more information is obtained through this process. And then from there, additional cleanup as if needed, or would be completed after that.
So we have a few minutes for some questions, and then we want to talk about some next steps. When do you meet next? When does the focus feasibility study come out? Those kinds of things. But first, questions about any of that? Anything new?
So if and when, I guess this is more for EPA, but if and when MNA is proposed, because just in my professional opinion, it sounds like that's the argument they're ramping up to make. So if and when that is proposed as a remedial action, is that something the EPA would entertain? Or is there going to be other remedial actions required? Because I mean, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the group, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. But from looking at this, the problem is not fixed.
Right. I can't say what we're leaning towards, but we're gonna look at the best option. And if it's not on the feasibility study, the best option, then we will put it back and make it. We can make our decision, but we make our decision based on the feasibility study, and then we can make our decision outside of the feasibility study. It's not a good answer.
I get it, I mean, right, like reading through this entire conceptual site model that where I'm at it's very obvious that that's the argument they're trying to make is, look, we've done all these things, and none of this works, and we can't take it out, because that's gonna be $1 billion and all these things. I mean, it's pretty evident that that's what they're gonna try to argue. So, and again, community-wise, our concern is, but now my city is paying to clean up your contamination through their treatment system. So, that's.
Would this process go through the proposed plan and the 9 steps with public comment in there also? Or is the room familiar with like the proposed plan and how remediation or cleanup options are investigated and determined? Just through a proposed plan with 9 step criteria, and I don't have all that information right for me, but. No.
Just for this site, we decided to do a public hearing.
Yeah.
We might not necessarily have to do it for bottom or
Okay.
EPC, but I think the decision was made that we.
Okay. So there's public comment for looking at the different options out there.
So while you're there anyway, can you just talk about what the timeline looks like or might look like for completion of a FFS?
Yeah, so right now, it's looking like somewhere around July. And those dates are posted on our site profile.
That's just when it's due, then EPA is gonna review it, evaluate, and maybe give it back.
And in fairness, that's not unusual. It's not unusual for a big report like that to go through.
Iterations.
We do rely on other scientists outside of EPA as well, so as long as we still have them. Yeah, so.
I know USGS.
USGS.
Writes a lot of comments for
I didn't notice, there was no mention of what the city is doing itself, those, the activated carbon rods.
That's because this is a conceptual site model for Ameren.
So they're basically doing their own thing separate of what y'all are doing.
They're doing what we request them to do.
So, you're talking about the gas system?
The city?
Talking about what the city's doing.
Yes.
Nobody's here to talk about
The
what the
city's doing outside of what EPA.
Okay, that answers my question. So they're basically doing their own thing. Sorry, yeah, thank you. That was the thing I forgot to acronym.
Other questions you have for these folks?
Okay. Do we get back to, in future meetings, OU 1, 2, and 3? I mean, it's not just OU 4.
Yeah, for sure.
As things progress.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, tonight's meeting was, we knew that in your 2 hours, this was going to take the whole time. So the idea is to continue to build the next agenda and to add the right topics to it. And yeah, and it's the whole Findett.
But to answer your question, yes, you do more than you regularly talk about.
Yeah. So that's a perfect segue, actually, for how soon might you meet again? What might you need to meet about? Again, the FFS is certainly an agenda topic. You all have to figure out exactly when that gets slotted in, when it will be here for presentation and review and discussion. But then there are ongoing efforts with 1, 2, and 3 to add on the agenda too. So thoughts about that? I don't know if anyone has thought, but certainly.
The city meeting is June 3rd.
That's the line.
So July for you all, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, my
too
only thing
soon?
about that is, I would kind of. be
Middle of summer?
interested to hear the EPA's response to the focus feasibility study, because again, submitting it is one thing, the EPA's response is another.
Yeah.
So I'm almost questioning whether
August?
just because we might have a better idea.
August?
Yeah, we can plan for August, and if it needs to be adjusted.
Yeah.
I mean, because again, to the rest of the group, we're really kind of in limbo until we get that next document, because that's what really kind of pushes what the next actions they're gonna take, or Ameren is gonna be required to take. So we really, there's not much to talk about until we see that.
And that's a meeting where you could expand some of the community outreach, try to get more people here, get more attention on this kind of conversation, build up this room a little bit.
For sure. And again, it's going to be a point of contention with the city as far as that meeting in June, because as you can see, like it's a challenge to keep people invested when things drag on this long, and people look at it, well, the city stays, my water stays, so I don't care, and it's a little bit more important than that, and so it's a struggle to get to contact people who either are on social media, and most people don't read the news. Anybody under the age of 30 doesn't read or watch the news anymore. So
do you think notices in the newspaper are effective?
Again, other
we
than
usually do Mid Rivers magazine, and we usually put it in 2 publications here. St. Charles Community News.
And I don't even, at my house, I don't even get Mid Rivers magazine.
I think a press release from the EPA when that is final.
Yes.
Could you do a press release for the meeting?
Oh, for the FFS meeting?
Yeah.
We could look into it, I'm not sure.
It depends on how we're doing the meeting, because I don't think it's a normal, so we're doing it through the CAD. I don't know. Yeah, let us look into it and let you know. So,
But to your newspaper, it helps with anybody over the age of 75. Even my grandparents don't read the newspaper anymore. So, I don't know. That's the struggle we're dealing with, is unless people are on social media, it's really hard to get in contact with the outskirts of our community. Short of sending people out to put out flyers, I really don't know a better way to do that. And if that's what we have to do, then fine. But we've been able to get a couple of additional people in, and if we can keep building on 2 or 3 people more every meeting, that helps. But it's just, I've got my former intern at Lindenwood. I've told her, bring friends, we need college kids to write letters. That's what you guys are good at. So I'm not on social media, so I'm not the social media expert.
So bring friends in August.
If I could just add quickly, I attended one of Mayor Borgmeyer's town halls, and he was promising things like we're going to have cleaner water than St. Louis, and there was no mention of this tag at all. Basically, the greater public is only aware of what the city is doing. As far as they know, the EPA and Ameren aren't doing anything. That's the problem. That's not
accurate.
Yeah.
Right.
No, the town hall was a few months ago. And a lot of these people didn't even know anything.
Town hall is every month.
Yeah, but I can't attend everything, I'm busy, but the last one I attended, people weren't even aware this was a thing, or the EPA and Ameren was even doing a thing. He was just making promises and stuff.
When's the next town hall?
I know it's every month, but
What about there's a council, I'm in Ward 5, and there's a meeting next Thursday
15th, is it?
I think so. And it's, I'm assuming all the other wards, they have similar meetings every month, and the cities keep, and the mayor's gonna be there, talk, et cetera. That might be a place to get this, if we contact the ward people, whoever those council people are, they could, because I get a newsletter from my ward person every week or every month, whatever, that describes all the stuff that's happening in the city. That might be, it's a small number, it's like 7 of them, right, it's wards, so if they have the information, it's just an email that they send out, and everybody, I get it as an association president, and I can disseminate it, that might be a way to get it out, because they would be invested in it, and there's no, from the politics of it, I don't think, they are council people, but I bet she would do it for me if I asked her, I don't know what the other council people think, but.
Yes, Denise is exceptional. She's
Yes.
great. She's not the normal.
Typical, yeah, I didn't think, because like, much more information we got out of her than anybody prior to her. Yes.
So Bill Otto would probably be willing to spread news about this.
It's just an idea that if we get the right.
Exactly.
One.
So you're suggesting, because this is where my political knowledge is lacking, so contact our ward.
Ward
Council
person.
Council person, and then maybe they can distribute
Say,
that.
hey, why don't you mention this at the next council meeting?
Or even like he's saying, because I get.
Because I think they have to tap into all the association, homeowner associations. I'm the president of mine, so that's why I get that. So that I can separate, it's up to me then to separate everybody else, but, so it's a small number they're emailing this to, and I would think they would want this information. Unless the city, says no, because they're council people, I don't know what the politics is gonna be. She may say I can't do that because the city's up to get sued and all that.
So they wouldn't hurt to ask.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to. She might do it because she seems like the kind of, I don't know if the other ones.
My word person lives in my subdivision.
And as soon as y'all have a venue and a date, I can send you the flyer.
Yeah,
Send out to whoever.
Well, this is, the mayor's gonna be at this with the council person, I don't see.
No, not showing up, but the
Providing the
flyer.
info. Flyer,
Yeah,
yeah.
they could take it or take the information.
I will find out from her if she's hesitant.
I'll talk to mine, so.
Yeah, if you get to each of the council members, that's huge.
Because again,
That's breaking it up into pieces and.
yeah, mine, he has like a monthly newsletter too.
Yeah.
Who's yours?
Vince.
Okay.
Yeah, he's great.
Okay, so find new ways to communicate, August 14th, same time, same place, will be the goal. That would be the next CAG. So that's the second Thursday, I just assumed you were sticking with it. All good?
Same location, or is it a?
We'll try for it, yeah, we have to ask, but doesn't look like people are beating down the door to use this room, so. I think we might be good. It's a little intimidating to come into this room, actually.
Get to the metal detectors, but I like the layout. I appreciate
Yeah, it's good.
the roundtable discussions.
Yeah. So anything else you all need of this group? Anything from the chairs you want to throw into the mix before we say goodnight?
No, again, I took a bunch of notes during this meeting, so I'll just read it to the whole CAG group, just so you have them on record. And I guess we'll stay in touch and just keep watching her updates, because a lot of what we do next week are on that. Is
And I'll send the recording out.
Okay.
Good. And lastly, thank you.
Yep,
Yes.
recordings, you'll have the recording, PowerPoint slides are either in paper form or we'll get those online, and a summary, basically a 9-page summary will also come out here in the next couple of days. So feel free to share it with your friends and community members.
How long do we have you to contact for additional information for this?
For,
You're the contact.
yep,
As long as you need.
as long as you need, yes,
If that changes, we will, okay.
yes.
Would people?
Yeah, Karen.
I'm
Sorry. No,
Would
go ahead.
people be interested in a, 35-page version of the 500-page document that you guys gave us, that was created with deep research features of AI? As an alternative to reading 500 pages.
Yeah.
Because all the questions and stuff that I've been asking have basically come from that, and it's does a really good job. It's something I can actually spend. I can't spend time on 600 pages, but I can spend time on 35 pages. And it's just a Word document. It's basically the Word, and I can send it out to whoever wants it. And it's not just the standard ChatGPT, it's using the higher end, deeper, 20 minutes to analyze and come back with a decent answer. That might give you a way to read and disseminate this without having to read all of it for those that don't want to spend time.
Probably with a disclaimer that it was like AI summarized.
Yeah, and just for you guys to have another way of doing this, if you don't have access to those tools, to have a shorter version, you can still dig into the big version and do all that, but I provided this Word document.
It's a great idea.
Yeah,
it's a great idea. I've started using mine for summarizing surveys, and so I'm in. I think it's worth having. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm not afraid of the machine.
Who can I send that? What email do I have? I guess I don't know what emails there.
Who's got all the emails?
Whoever
I
sends-
have a list of everybody. That would be what she does.
Well, let's send somebody that can, whoever normally sends out the weekly thing.
That would be her.
Send it.
No. You can send it to me and.
Okay. Is your email on something that?
You have a list of everything. I have a list of everything.
And
But do I have your email?
No, but I can.
if you want to send me both the list and that document, I'm happy to do a little legwork for you too. So let me know.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Just send it to him.
Yeah. Send it to me. There you go.
One more thing.
I'll get you my contact. So one more thing.
The lady sitting back there was Ameren Corporate Counsel, so I asked her if
Oh, wow, they showed up.
we could get Ameren to the meeting, and I guess she's gonna pass that along to them.
Nice.
Wow.
As far as EPA goes, is there any way that you can push harder? Because I've heard from other people that you can compel them to come to a CAC.
I know that the message has been communicated in the past. Tanya,
Her name,
council.
I know.
How do you know?
because she said her name and then I
Googled
her.
She said her name so fast, I didn't catch it.
It was, let me.
This is with Ameren.
Ameren.
This is the first time Ameren has ever
This was
sent
all-
anyone ever to one
It
of
was
these meetings.
Jennifer Mark.
That we know of.
No, they have.
I'll ask Tommy to.
Yeah, I know it's been communicated in the past.
And have you reached out to the city?
The city's been here before.
The city's been here before.
I don't know why they didn't come tonight.
Yeah.
They're on the.
Yeah, they're on the list. Yeah. Yeah.
So they knew about it.
They should have.
There was a lawsuit update.
Yeah.
Apparently it was supposed to be January 2026, but it got moved to September 2026 in the latest St. Charles magazine.
And there's a wide variation in the Superfund work I'm doing. I've got one where the responsible party is never coming, and I got one where they're everywhere. So yeah, it's the full continuum, and Ameren can choose or be pushed or be compelled, but they're making their own choices. I don't know how. I'm not sure you can order them to come here, but you can. Yeah. So I'm experiencing the full continuum. PRPs who refuse to have anything to do with this menu, and others where they're all in it. So yeah, it's not out of the question to ask them and to continue to press on them to show up and say, yeah, those are our graphs, and here's what we think we know. Bring a scientist, like they should be doing that.